Today we are sitting here with बीबी जसकरण कौर जी. She is co-founder and co-director of Ensaaf. बीबी जी, वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा, वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह. Can you please tell our audience about yourself and a little bit about the background?
I am the co-founder and co-director of Ensaaf, and I was born and raised in New Jersey. And one of my earliest memories are of the June 1984 carnage and the November 1984 carnage. I grew up attending protests about the abuses, so we were informed about what was happening in Punjab. We traveled to Punjab during the time period of the abuses, and I remember the curfews and the tanks and hearing stories of people's bodies showing up in canals in the villages that we visited. So I attended college at Yale, and I attended law school at Harvard. But when I entered law school, I didn't plan to work on these abuses because I didn't think there was anything that someone born and raised in the United States could do in regards to alleviating the situation in Punjab. But I was encouraged by a professor, and I traveled to Punjab after my first year of law school and had the fortune to work with human rights activists who belong to the Committee for Coordination on Disappearances in Punjab. And that summer basically changed my life and is how I got involved with this work.
Great. So can you please tell us how you come up with the idea of creating such an amazing and wonderful organization?
Hey, well, so when I was in Punjab that summer, my job was to look at what happened to families who filed cases on behalf of their loved ones who had been disappeared. So I interviewed about 30 families and 30 judges. And when you meet the families and you see the reality of the abuses they have suffered and how those abuses continue to impact their day-to-day lives, and then you also meet with judges who deny the abuses and who do a great job in glossing over what happened, that really impacted me. And there were a few visits with some families. For example, I met Master Ram Singh, and he had his older brother had been killed by the police, and he was raising his kids and his brother's kids. And a week or two before I met him, he had just suffered from a stroke, so he was paralyzed on his entire left side. And it was very painful to hear him recounting what his family was going through. And the police officer who had killed his brother was still in power and continued to harass the family. So this wasn't an issue of just past abuse, but it was a daily abuse that they were suffering. But so at the same time as seeing his suffering, his father was there, and he embodied the spirit of Chardi Kala, and he was like, don't worry, as long as I have fight in me, I'll keep on fighting this. If one person will stand with me, I'll continue it. And I felt like that was a call that the families there, they're ready to fight for justice. So it's our responsibility to stand up and join them in this fight. So sorry. Then I knew Sukhman Thammi. He's the co-founder and co-director of Ensaaf. We'd grown up together, and he was also similarly dedicated to these issues. So when we came back, we both completed law school, and then talked with professors and other human rights organizations who were doing work internationally, and came up with the idea, and we founded Ensaaf in 2004.
That's great. So can you please tell a little about Ensaaf and its mission?
Sure. So Ensaaf's mission is to achieve justice and end impunity by documenting the abuses that happened in Punjab from 1984 to 1995, fighting for justice for these abuses, and organizing survivors to advocate for their rights to truth, justice, and reparations. And we draw our inspiration from Sardar Jaswant Singh Khalarda, the human rights defender who uncovered government evidence of mass cremations, where the police were taking the bodies of the people they had killed and disappeared and then secretly cremating them. In his last speech before an international audience in Canada, he described 3 strategies, which was that we as a community don't know how many people have been killed by the police. You know, he said some say 50,000, some say 1 million, but we don't have a number. So the first purpose is to document and understand what happened to our community. Then the second is that we need to show the limits of the Indian judiciary, take these struggles to the legal limit. And then the third was, he talked about taking this issue, this decade of disappearances to the People's Court, which is educate the world about what happened to the Sikh community.
So if I'm getting right, so disappearance in Punjab is by the government, right?
Yes, it's by Indian security forces, so it could be Punjab police, it could be border security force, paramilitary forces, or even Indian army. I feel very fortunate to work with the staff at Ensaaf and to work alongside the survivors who you know, it's a labor of love in terms of the struggle for justice and affirming the humanity of their loved one who was killed by the police, and also struggling for justice. It's brought me closer, you know, on a personal level to, in my relationship to Sikhi, because I've had to deal with people's capacity for evil in terms of understanding the atrocities inflicted on our people, but then also I've had the great fortune to work with people who embody the Sikh spirit of Chardi Kala and fighting for justice despite loss of life and livelihood. So I feel like very honored to be able to spend whatever portion of my time I can in this struggle. And you know, it's affected not only me but also my family in terms of educating my kids so that they can, they've had a chance to, you know, be among our contemporary heroes.
I'm sure our audience will be happy to know about your current and past projects you worked on.
Okay, so one of our most massive undertaking in our current project is a Punjab-wide census of disappearances on lawful killings. So after a few years of developing a survey instrument with leading human rights activists and mathematicians in terms of understanding how do you best capture the abuses in terms of both recording people's personal narratives but also tracing the patterns of abuse and identifying the key perpetrators, we developed a survey instrument and have implemented that throughout all of Punjab, so village to village. And at this point we've reached 6,000 villages, and our goal is to fully document all of Punjab and then release this information through reports, an online memorial, and then also use it for legal advocacy. That's our most massive undertaking. We've also worked on, we did another study. For example, one of our first projects was with the Nobel Prize winning organization Physicians for Human Rights, as well, and NYU Bellevue Program for Survivors of Torture. So we organized a study where 6 doctors from the United States who were trained in documenting torture and the effects of disappearances and killings, they went to Punjab and they interviewed 130 families, survivors of the disappeared, and they were shocked to find that you know, 2 decades later, more than 40% of the family members were still suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And they even had cases where the physical effects of torture were still lingering 20 years later. Like, people hadn't been able to get medical treatment for what they had suffered. So that was one of our first experiences with a larger scale documentation project. And on the legal side, we worked on the case of Sardar Jaswant Singh Kaur. We provided litigation support in terms of writing briefs and helping with the petitions in the argument phase of the trial court and then in the high court as well. And that case, as you may know, went to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court upheld the life sentences of 5 police officers for their role in abducting and killing Jaswant Singh Kaur.
It's been 30 years since 1984, so why do you think documentation is crucial now?
Okay, well, on a most basic and personal level, when I first started this work and had the chance to meet families of the disappeared, they were very moved that somebody was recording the story and the struggle of their loved one, that their loved one's name would exist beyond what the Indian government said about them. In terms of a community level, we still don't know how many people were killed or disappeared by the police, and who did that and how did it happen. We don't understand the extent of the abuses that have been inflicted on our community. In order to get justice, we need to have that kind of information and those facts to build our court cases and to build our statement to the world. So there's a noted academic who worked on torture and trauma in Latin America, and she said that all we have to do for perpetrators to succeed is for a bystander to do nothing. So the perpetrators first try to ensure secrecy and silence, which means silencing the voices of the disappeared. So the documentation work directly counters that. It gives a voice to the victims and to their families. The next thing the perpetrator tries to do is to destroy the credibility of the survivors, to say that they're lying. But when you have evidence, especially large-scale evidence like we're working on collecting through our documentation program, that directly challenges their attempts, and that supports the families in their struggle for justice. And then the third thing the perpetrator tries to do is to ensure that no one listens. And that's I'd say, the challenge that our community is facing right now, is how to collect our evidence, how to get together as a community and ensure that not only our own community is educated about what's happening, and then also the world knows what happened from 84 to 95.
So there are some people out there those saying this works promote militancy.
Right.
So what do you want to say about that?
Militancy is fueled by the unequal application of the law, and our work is about upholding the rule of law for everyone. Everyone has to follow the law, even if they're the state. And in terms of fundamental human rights are non-derogable, which means that in no situation, not a militancy, not terrorism, in no situation is the state allowed to rescind or limit or just completely remove fundamental human rights protections.
There are a few people out there those say it's been 30 years since 1984, forget all these abuses and move on. In India, people don't care about this stuff.
Right.
So what do you want to say to those people?
First, anyone who's saying that is someone who hasn't gone through these abuses. And these abuses did not just happen 30 years ago. It's an abuse that's lived out on a daily basis. And in order to rejuvenate our community, we have to deal with the death and destruction that occurred 30 years ago. It's had, like the study I mentioned earlier that we did with Physicians for Human Rights, demonstrates that these abuses have had a continuing impact on the health and livelihood of surviving family members. Also, you can't move on until there's been a full accounting of what happened. So forgiveness is not even an issue because the state hasn't even acknowledged that they committed these abuses. They haven't named the people responsible for these abuses, and they haven't held them accountable. Under international law, there's like 3 basic requirements in order for a state to redress these violations, which means that you have to know the full truth of what happened. Then you have to bring the killers to justice, the people who perpetrated these abuses. And then you have to provide what they call guarantees of non-recurrence and restitution, which is do what you can to bring the families back to the status they were in before the abuses happened, and then also provide mental and physical rehabilitation, but then also change the system that operates so that these abuses can't happen again. We can't forget what happened because the threat of it recurring is a daily and real threat. You know, the DGP of Punjab, Sumedh Singh Sani, himself was a major architect and implementer of these abuses, and he's still in power. So the people who killed the most, who perpetrated the most abuses, actually rose in the ranks and now occupy some of the senior-most positions of the Punjab police. Then they've gone on and have gone on to advise the government in other regions of India. So some of the people who were responsible for the abuses in Punjab then went on to Kashmir. KPS Gill went on to advise the government in how to deal with the Naxalites. So if India, wants to be serious about living up to its name as a democracy, it has to begin to uphold the rule of law and actually put in place people who will act as guardians of the law and not subvert it.
Since you are documenting abuses and disappearance in Punjab, so you have a contact with the families. So can you please give us insight how those family, what they want actually.
In our interviews, the families repeatedly say that they want justice. They're not acting from any desire for revenge or retribution. They want the person or people who perpetrated these abuses on their family to be held accountable. And they want, the name of their loved one cleared.
Since Ensaaf is doing amazing work out there and helping those survived families, so how can people help Ensaaf?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. First, to tell you a little bit about Ensaaf, we're a registered nonprofit organization committed to operational and financial transparency. We are a large nonprofit in that we are 8 to 9 full-time staff in the United States, and then a team of at least 10 people in Punjab working every day, going village to document these cases. We're also facing a time frame, meaning that the people who hold the most information about their loved ones who were killed or disappeared by the police are the parents. And I'd say we've got about 2 to 3 years to capture this information before a lot of it is lost forever. There have been cases where we've documented a case, and then when we come back to do a video interview, the father or the mother has passed away. And so we're facing an urgent situation, and our biggest obstacle actually is not, the staff or operating in Punjab, but it's our lack of funding. So we operate with about 2 to 3 months of funding, and that makes it difficult to expand our work as we hope to do, so that we can complete the documentation of the remaining 6,000 villages in Punjab. So what we really need from the international Sangat is for people to approach us, ask us questions about our work, make sure you feel secure in supporting this organization, and then financially contribute to carry this work forward. We really operate to make sure that your contributions we go the extra mile in terms of how we use the donation, and we'd appreciate as much financial support as possible. We also are in regular need of people who are fluent in both Punjabi and English, and who can contribute a set number of hours a week to help us with translation work.
Video we have just seen was very powerful and emotional. So what happened when camera was just turned off?
The movie ends with the last hearing in Satwant Singh Manik's case before the High Court, which is in September 2013. And he gives us his powerful statement that he will not be intimidated, nor bought, nor sold. In November of 2013, the High Court issued its judgment, where they refused to grant an inquiry into the killings, and they also fined him 2,000 rupees for each police officer that he implicated in the torture and killings. Their decision was a blatant miscarriage of justice. For example, they totally ignored the material on the record. The policemen themselves submitted post-mortem reports for a few of the people who were killed, and in those reports there's evidence that the killings occurred at point-blank range, and that was enough to show that there was a reason to order a further inquiry into the killings. But the judges did not address that evidence at all. They also said that Manik was acting out of a desire for vengeance because he had false cases pending against him, so they maligned his character. Whereas in reality and on the record, Satwant Singh Manik and his attorney had submitted the acquittals in those cases. For example, the police had filed 3 false cases against him when he first complained about the abuses, and he was acquitted in all of those cases. They were all found to be false cases, but the judges did not address that at all. They further said that the families themselves have not spoken up, whereas in reality the families had filed applications to intervene in that case, in Manik's case, and their application was rejected. And as you can see in the movie, they regularly attended the hearings on behalf of their loved ones and to show their support for the case filed by Satwant Singh Manik. So that took us till November 26th, and then what we've done since then is that we have drafted an appeal to the Supreme Court, and we filed that appeal in April 2014. We actually learned about Satwant Singh Manik through our Punjab documentation project. So while we were going village to village documenting cases of disappearances, unlawful killings, we documented the cases that he was fighting on behalf, and they all mentioned that a police officer had come and told them about how their loved one had been tortured and killed by the police. And then we also interviewed Monik because, as you see in the movie, his father was died as a result of police torture. And we found our interviews and interactions with these families compelling, and his struggle for justice that he has pursued single-handedly for 20 years, and decided to do a longer feature on his case. Well, in his last speech before an international audience, Sardar Jaswant Singh Khalsa said that the Khalsa was inaugurated to protect the human rights of the world, and if we can't protect our own human rights, we won't be able to give any definition of the Khalsa. So in terms of the preservation of our basic identity, it's our responsibility to stand up for truth and justice regardless of the cost. We also have to show the limits. We have to stand with the families for whom this is a labor of love, of acknowledging their loved one and their love for the person who was killed by the police by struggling for justice on behalf of that person. And we need to show the limits and the reality of the Indian democracy and judicial system.
So you're doing this since many years. So have been there any time you think of stopping this or anything?
Yeah, it's been 10 years since we founded Ensaaf, and there have been points when we waver, one, when you're face to face with your own shortcomings, two, when you encounter the horrid stories of abuse, just trying to understand man's capacity for evil, and then I think once I've met these families, I could not respect myself if I turned my back on them, because we live in the diaspora lives of relative comfort and security, and we owe it to our brothers and sisters in Punjab to stand with them in their struggle for justice. They who have given up and sacrificed so much, and this is our chance to write the current chapter of Sikh history and to show how our community can stand up against injustice. There are so many times in my day when I'm taking care of my kids and combing their hair or feeding them lunch, and I think about the mothers of whose loved ones, whose sons and daughters were killed by the Punjab police, and how they must be remembering those moments and what they must think from the moment that their loved one is picked up by the police. How you pass each minute, each month, or even years without knowing what happened to your loved one. And I feel like it's our responsibility to do what we can to stand with them.
At the end, I want to say thank you to you. You let us come in your home and give us this great interview. And is there any last word you want to say?
I'd like to say thank you to the Sikh channel and for giving us this opportunity to share our work and speak to the international community.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.